Welcome to the discussion with
James Nash.
and Cristina Aldeanueva. Today, we will be discussing informal social control as well as social norms among students at Trinity College. Stay tuned for unique insight after the break. So, James, do you find that students are a close-knit group?
What do you mean by that?
Well, generally, do you find that there's frequent face-to-face interaction, among students or within their specific groups or groups that they might overlap with?
I would definitely say that because the school itself is so small, we have a lot of people that interact with each other. The groups overlap, but I don't think that there is really, maybe between sports teams and fraternities is probably one of the only groups that truly have complete overlap. Like, I know in the past, SIU has been a majority of the football team, or same thing with Crow. I mean, would you agree with that?
No, I absolutely would.
All right, then in response, I have a question for you. If this is true, do you find that information between the different types of groups is accurately passed, or is there a disconnect when passing gossip between different groups?
Right, so when it comes to gossip, I find that within small groups, you can generally rely on that gossip to be accurate, but once the rumors and gossip starts to spread into bigger circles, that's when you start playing a game of telephone. Things get mixed up, things get lost, biases are inserted, and the story begins to change a little bit.
Interesting. So information gets transferred like a game of telephone. Things are blown out of proportion. And do you find that students have the same sort of power to punish and to reward with gossip and ostracism and measured violent self-help? I mean, do all students equally have power over other students in terms of social control?
Right. Well, I think a lot of this power is pretty relative to what matters to the individual. So if you have somebody who really doesn't care about going out and really doesn't, want to get into these frat parties, if there's negative gossip about that individual within the frats, but these people don't want to be getting into the frats, it doesn't really affect them there. But the moment, let's say, a girl is labeled, a slut, and she gets, and the frats start talking badly about her, she might, and she cares a lot about partying, then she might have a harder time and the gossip might affect her more.
So frats really are the dictator of social life for those who decide to go out and to party, and basically being blacklisted from a frat can somewhat end social life, would you say?
I wouldn't say it ends social life, I would say it changes your social life. So if you do really buy into the frat scene and you're blacklisted from, a frat or more frats, then yeah, you're gonna have a hard time.
So obviously there's gossip and things that can get you socially ostracized. But so we learned about Robert Muller's 3 categories of social behavior. He has prosocial, ordinary, and antisocial behaviors. At Trinity, what would you consider? Let's start with prosocial. What would you consider a prosocial behavior?
Pro-social behavior, you could define that as a behavior that warrants praise or reward, something you want to look at and be like, wow, that's good. Generally, good grades, athletic excellence. When people are really good at a sport, that's kind of, you're put up on a pedestal for that. Greek life organization, leadership, and also male promiscuity. There's a lot of guys, going for a lot of girls and getting high fives for that.
Yeah, I would definitely say that those are four things that are very much so rewarded at Trinity. But what about for ordinary behaviors, things that don't get a response that you maybe could out in the outside world, but at Trinity it's like, yeah, everyone does that, no big deal.
Honestly, I'd start with binge drinking. In the real world, if you saw a regular person or you got to know a regular person and started to discover that their drinking habits were similar to that of a college student, you might want to take a step back and reassess a little bit, as well as the use of drugs, as long as they're not harder than cocaine, is, nobody really bats an eye if somebody walks in and says they did a line.
Did some coke, yeah. But if you found out one of your friends was shooting up heroin, you'd probably that would be what would be considered an antisocial behavior, most likely, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that would warrant some kind of blame or punishment or action that is not necessarily positive.
People would try to stop you from doing that. But for cocaine, weed, drinking, all that kind of stuff, I would have to agree that I don't think anyone would stop you or even question what you were doing if you started to do one of those. So, what are some things other than drugs harder than cocaine that would be considered antisocial or warrant a blame or punishment reaction from someone?
I'd start with female promiscuity. You hear a lot of locker room talk that can be really degrading towards a woman, while the double standard is if a man were doing the same behavior, it wouldn't be antisocial. It would actually be prosocial. Another behavior is, a person who seeks to get into physical altercations when trying to party. We all know that alcohol can cause a lot of disinhibition and aggression in some people, and nobody really likes the guy who's trying to start a fight at a
Yeah.
party.
And when the ordinary response, or when there's ordinary behaviors such as doing cocaine, I would imagine that physical altercations become somewhat of a problem. But what about things like date rape? Things, guys being overly aggressive. We know that female promiscuity is antisocial and male promiscuity is prosocial, but is there a level that gets reached by a man that is no longer prosocial?
Absolutely. I mean, the Trinity community, at least from what I've seen, really, I mean, if somebody, if a man or even a woman tries to roofie somebody else, that's just not okay on all fronts. I've never met anybody who accepts that or, praises that. And generally, it's a really antisocial behavior.
What about, you know, obviously these are things that happen on a college campus and whatnot, but things that are different than mainstream society rules. I mean, we talked about binge drinking and we talked about cocaine use, but is there anything else that we'd say is different on a college campus than it is for, real life adults?
I think that when you start to compare a college campus, the norms on a college campus, to the norms of, you know, real life, you start to see that college is kind of like a red light district. Kids
Interesting.
come up with, because you're putting a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old kids in a confined space in a fence and, tell them to just do, um, they're gonna come up with their own, the law of the jungle. And within the law of the jungle, James, can you tell me, do you find if there's some sort of agreement among students about how antisocial behavior, should be punished or dealt with?
Well, I think that there is some sort of uh, general agreement among students that you don't go to the higher powers, so to the RA, to the um, to professors, to campus safety unless it's something that's truly, truly necessary to deal with at that moment. Uh, Annoyances are dealt with normally between friends, maybe between friend groups. Groups of people may get together and be like, hey, our friends are fighting, let's talk about it, or something like that. That's, example of things that would lead that is if someone hooks up with someone's significant other, if maybe you're blasting way too much music all the time, or you're getting really, really drunk and breaking things, but normally between friends. It's when things escalate to something higher than that that you start to actually do see like RAs getting involved. When it's not between friends as well as when you start to see actual members of the hierarchy above students becoming involved in student affairs.
So that being said, for more severe altercations, would you say that when would you say the Trinity College authorities, like the dean of students, or law enforcement, police and courts, need to get involved in issues?
Really, police and higher authorities don't tend to get involved unless things escalate to a whole new level, or if things start to become involved with, let's say, the local community around. I know that parties are registered with the school and are supposed to be only for Trinity students, so there have been troubles in the past where they've had to go to police or to campus safety in order to make sure that those parties stay safe. Um, I know that sometimes people will go to the dean of students if they feel that it can't be dealt with between their own students, but really this happens when it's strangers interacting. I don't know of very many friends who end up in an altercation that gets brought to the dean of students. It's more so when something somewhat random happens and there's no structure between you and the other person in order to fix that. So I'll turn the question and ask you and see if we can get maybe a difference in opinion here between the two of us. As a freshman, do you see that people actually uphold the college's rules, or is it more that there are rules put in place by students that are followed more so than the actual rules of the school?
Right. So I think that freshmen are actually the biggest culprits of not really following the school rules and dealing with things on their own because of this widespread insecurity and trying to figure things out in order to fit in. That you'll find, I see it more likely that a freshman wouldn't necessarily rat out another freshman because they're so worried about reputation that why would they want to mess up their reputation so early freshman year? And even then, you get this kind of everybody's trying to establish themselves. And I mean, I'll speak on my floor. My floor is very loud, and they're always up, and there's always something going on, and we'll leave it at that. But even then, our RA, she's never there. She doesn't care what we do. She doesn't enforce anything of what she does. And
Do you know of RAs who are not as lenient?
I do. I have a few friends in other dorms who find themselves, they have um, a stricter RA who enforces the rules more. And I think that a lot of your freshman year experience actually has to do with what kind of RA you get, which is all by chance.
Interesting. So you really do think that the rules of the school are dictated by the students more so than by the hierarchies of RAs and student government and all of that kind of stuff.
As much as the student government and the RAs and the authorities, the higher ups, as much as they would love to hear that they make the rules, I definitely think that the students are the ones coming up with the norms. The students are the ones enforcing them through their own informal control. And especially as the freshmen come in and see and start to understand these norms and the way things work, they're less likely to be the ones to make a change or go against the norms because of this you know, rush to establish a good reputation.
And I'll say from my perspective as a senior that I think that's actually still true. Um, the only difference is very few people are trying to create a reputation for themselves as much as they are either trying to hold one um, that they've had, keep the reputation that they have, or uh, you know, come back from something they probably did freshman or sophomore year or something and be able to outlive that reputation. Um, but students still do not, even as seniors, don't necessarily follow the rules. There are definitely many, many more rules that are followed that are set up by students than there are that are set up by the actual RAs or the student government or anything like that.
Obviously, there are things that happen on campus that are unknown by the higher ups. Do you believe there are different markets for illegal behaviors like underage drinking, recreational drugs, gambling, commercial sex, or an informal credit market? And what are the student norms about these markets and behaviors? And how do these norms differ from market to market?
Well, first off, I don't believe that there are. I know that there are. Um, Students definitely help out other students with various illegal things. Younger students will ask older students to buy them alcohol if they don't have a fake ID. And that tends to be something that can bring the grades together, actually. When it comes to looking for recreational drugs, again, information is spread pretty quickly and easily throughout students. There's a general consensus among students that you don't rat out on someone because that person, is just a student just like you, and they're trying to make some extra money. So that's definitely a thing as well. But for like gambling, commercial sex, an informal credit market, I don't know of anything like that. Definitely not commercial sex. Most likely not gambling. Informal credit market, I mean, the best you could say is like, what is your social status? And does that dictate something that you get? Like when you're waiting in line to get into a frat, I guess if you have a higher social status or you know someone, you'll get in faster. But there's not like a legitimate system that keeps people in line. But these markets are run by students, for students, and
Well, can any student participate in these markets, or does reputation or status factor into a person's, let's say, eligibility to be a part of this, their trust?
I would definitely say that any student who wants to can be a part of the markets. The example with the frats is a little bit more difficult because that comes with social status and standing. So you have to be friends with the right types of people. But when it comes to things like underage drinking or recreational drugs, all you have to do is ask around, and eventually you'll find someone who can help you out. I don't think that there are really restrictions for those markets because unless you're known as someone who's a snitch or is going to tell on you or report it, then yeah, I guess those people would be restricted from those markets. But most of the time, people are looking to make money. They're looking to get rid of the product that they have, or they're looking to help someone out. So they're not necessarily stopping people from buying weed because they're not cool enough. They're definitely more just on the capitalist side of like, let's make money off of doing this.
And in terms of making money, I've actually found that students, particularly freshmen, have to advocate for themselves a little more in these illegal markets because they are at a disadvantage in terms of experience, and their edge of information is a little bit it's less just because they're so new to the campus. So, for example, a freshman trying to purchase either illegal drugs or have somebody of age buy them, you know,
Alcohol.
alcohol, exactly. They might find themselves in a situation where they're being completely overcharged, but because they don't really know what is, a normal price for these things, they'll get themselves ripped off.
So those were the insights into markets and various illegal activities. But what about just things that are antisocial and that are not necessarily consensual? So excessive noise, violence, vandalism, theft, and that kind of stuff. Is there a way that students tend to handle those types of things?
Right, so when the students are staying, students will generally try to sort things out on their own without involving any of the higher up authorities. When it comes to smaller things such as noise, that's generally dealt with, either face to face or with a text saying keep it down um, and or banging on the wall if it's a freshman dorm. Um, but if if the issue becomes very frequent and very recurring and very disruptive, then that's when you might need an intervention from a higher up. And then when it comes to more severe issues like vandalism or theft, um, generally I'll find that people will get the higher ups involved to help sort that out just because it is a bigger deal. And then generally the trend is that if the higher ups do not need to get involved, it's better not to get them involved because college is so status oriented. Nobody wants to taint their reputation and paint themselves as a snitch, um, especially not freshman year when they have the next 4 years to deal with that reputation.
Yeah, I'd say that even holds true as seniors, people who have developed their reputation and know where they kind of stand socially or whatnot. But even so, you don't tend to have people go into the higher ups in order to do or take care of something as simple as a noise complaint. That's still just bang on the wall, shoot someone a text, or honestly, just kind of sit there and deal with it and
A lot of
annoy to
that.
your friends. Be like, my neighbors are so loud and it sucks, but you don't tend to do much about it unless it's really like.
Really, really bad. No, I would agree with that. And even then, there's a lot of truthful negative gossip about, the few kids on the floor that are being super loud consistently.
Yeah, and people definitely develop some sort of a hatred relationship with those people, and everyone knows about them. And not saying that means that they're hated people on campus by any means, but those who are consistently too loud or consistently vandalize things or steal things from even just like the walls in the hallways and stuff, people know who they are. And so there's a lot of sympathy between students being like, oh my gosh, I know they're so loud, it's so obnoxious, but I don't really find that students tend to do much about it.
If anything, they just add it to their reputation and they get tagged that and it stays with.
So we've talked a lot about reputation, we've talked a lot about social aspects of things, but in the end, we are going to college, and this is about school. So what are student norms about like plagiarism and things like that? As a freshman, have you found that freshmen tend to help out other people? What about seniors or juniors, sophomores? Like, what's your intake on the norms of plagiarism and honestly cheating at Trinity?
Yeah, so among the freshmen, there's kind of this general understanding that nobody really knows what they're doing. So everyone's going to try to help somebody out. And it's also the more you help somebody else out, the more they will help you out. So whether it's, asking how a test went, somebody, they may give you a plain answer. They may be like good or bad. Or they might provide another student with a little more insight as to the specifics of it. Even then, I don't find that people will generally rat each other out in terms of, for cheating or plagiarism. If as long as it doesn't involve them and as long as there are no implications to anybody in it that they could get in trouble, then I find that it generally flies under the radar. So we've seen that there are norms for, everything ranging from cheating to being a snitch and all of that. But James, do you find that there are norms of etiquette? These can include how one dresses, maybe one's particular style, or their manner of being, as part of informal social control among students. Do you find that these norms of etiquette are a mechanism for sorting students among groups?
Well, I'll definitely say that there's a norm in terms of how you dress, and that is very East Coast preppy kind of vibe. I'm from Chicago, which isn't necessarily uh, East or West Coast. It's very much so Midwest and somewhat similar to this area. But even I find that the dress code for a lot of things is much, much more preppy. Um, the guys who are in fraternities are tending to wear, uh, you know, different colored shorts and maybe a collared shirt. People dress up somewhat nicer, but also kind of like a slob. It's like a weird combination of the both. Um, and I've definitely talked with people who aren't from this area who aren't from similar areas that found that they had comments made about the way that they dress and about what they're wearing. A friend of mine was from California, and for a long time, she dressed the way she dressed in California, and then people started being like, "Why do you dress like that's weird?" And she switched, and now she dresses much more preppy, much more East Coast like, and most of that was in order just to fit in and to get people to stop saying things about what she was wearing. So I would definitely say that there's a norm for etiquette and dress. And it does actually have some sort of a control over students with how they act and how they get perceived by other students, considering the majority of students at Trinity College are from around this area on the East Coast. So the last and final question that we're going to be talking about today is going to get a little personal. Cristina, if you had to categorize yourself into one of the three categories of either mainstream, misfit, or free spirit, where do you think that you'd fall?
I'd have to say I fall as a free spirit, quite frankly, because I know the norms, I understand them, and to some extent I respect them, but I really don't care about them. I do my own thing. I do what makes me happy. I do what is going to help make those I care about around me be happy, as well as into my own um, academic, athletic, and artistic success. And that's just really what I focus on and don't really buy into the whole BS that surrounds the mainstream.
Yeah.
What would you say, James? What about you?
Uh, I think I started off being a little bit more mainstream, trying to be like, oh yeah, I'm a big dude who's gonna party and do all that kind of stuff. And then slowly, as my time at Trinity has extended, I've definitely turned more into free spirit. I go out and I go and I have fun and I do kind of the mainstream things sometimes, but then I do a lot of theater and I'm in a cappella and I'm kind of friends with people from all over the place. I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm mainstream by any means. So I would say free spirit is not a bad way to categorize myself either.
From your transition to, mainstream to free spirit, when did these realizations come? When did you realize that you don't have to buy into being this certain way?
It was kind of actually last semester, my spring of my junior year, when I lived with a bunch of guys who were very free spirit people, who don't do anything that the mainstream people do. They almost never go to big parties or frats or any kind of stuff. And so when I was hanging out with them consistently, I just realized that I might as well do what's making me happy and be with the people that are fun than be able to say like, oh yeah, I went to SIU this weekend and it was sick, because it's
There's
almost
nothing
never
to
that
that.
sick.
There's nothing to it.
No, most of the time you're not having that much fun. You're cramped. You're or if you were a guy like me, you're standing outside and you're not even getting into the party. So what's really the point? And you can either suck up to guys who you don't need to suck up to because they have this weird amount of power by letting you in, or you can just say, I don't really care, and do what you want to do. And I think that's a lot more fun and honestly is a better way to live life, and a good way to be happier on a college campus is when you really just, for lack of a better term, don't give a fuck. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for listening to our conversation about social norms here at Trinity College. This has been James Nash and
Cristina Aldeanueva.
And please tune in next week for another amazing edition of The Discussion.